Hello Horror Hounds, released 2 years after The Mummy's Hand. The Mummy's Tomb is very keen for you to understand that 30 years have passed since this previous film. That means this film is set in the 1970s. Banning, the clean-cut hero from the first film, is now an old man in old man makeup. Everyone who survived from the first film who's in this is now in old man makeup. He's recounting his adventures of his youth to his son and his son's fiancée. And after using that as an excuse to reuse 10 minutes of footage from The Mummy's Hand in a movie that's only 60 minutes long, Banning turns to the camera and says, "At least I have the satisfaction of knowing I helped destroy a monster." No, you didn't, Banning, and neither did your mate Babe manage to kill the cult high priest Anhodeb. Anhodeb lives, played again by George Zucco, now also in old man makeup, and the old man shakes. He's the new dying high priest who passes on the mantle to a character called Mehmet Bey, covering all the rules as you would expect about tanner leaves and what to do with them. He sends Bey packing off to America to finally fulfill the vengeance of Kharis on Banning, Babe, and because we need more victims now, all of their living relatives. Why this 30-year time jump? It's the most bizarre script choice that will leave you scratching your head and asking why the cult of Karnak never just sent a load of assassins in a boat across the ocean to do in Banning years ago. But it doesn't really matter because, hey kids, the mummy's coming to America. Arrangements have been made for Mehmet Bey to take over the role of cemetery caretaker in Mapleton, Massachusetts, where Banning now resides. This allows him to hide Kharis' sarcophagus in a crypt. I guess that's the tomb of the mummy's tomb. It also affords our titular mummy the opportunity to limp around a brilliantly gothic, foggy graveyard set. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I like my mummy movies to be set in Egypt. Whilst there's a certain thrill to be had seeing the bandaged one shambling through a proper gothic cemetery, he looks out of place in small town USA, climbing trellises and traversing white picket fences. Whilst there could have been an element of an ancient Egyptian evil in your own backyard, he just looks a little bit silly. To my mind, when not surrounded by the time-blasted relics of an ancient history that was once his present day, everything he held dear turns to artifacts being pored over by treasure seekers. The mummy's robbed of his pathos. The tanner leaves are back. Yay! Kharis is given the serum of 9 leaves and the film just leaves it at that. The script plays loosey-goosey with the weirdly specific tanner leaf rules of The Mummy's Hand, and that's all to the good. Look, the leaves are magic, right? They just do a magic thing that means we get to have a mummy in our movie. Can we all just move on, please? Because we're now in America and the enlightened West, when murders start happening, we get to have a police investigation by rational policemen and science. Go science! At first, there are reports of shadows. Sincerely, someone wakes up the county sheriff because a shadow passed by their window. Indeed, a couple report an ominous shadow, and given that the mummy's actual tomb is only shown in a still from The Mummy's Hand during the opening and closing credits of the movie, I'm not sure why this movie wasn't called The Mummy's Shadow. A grey smear left on the throats of our strangled victims when looked at under a microscope turns out to be mould, and later a piece of mouldy bandage is found to be the source of, well, mould. To be fair to Professor Norman from the university, the police's go-to science guy, he does manage in a leap of narrative necessity to confirm that the mould on the bandage is the same substance that was found on the victims' necks. Oh, plus It's centuries old. Plus, the cloth is impregnated with myrrh, cedar oil, sodium carbonate, and all the ingredients in the Egyptian embalming process. Plus, the bandage has a small hieroglyphic on it, which is the same as one found on the mummy of Ananka and dates back 3,000 years to the time of her father Amenephis. In quite short shrift, then, science has, as Professor Norman states, proven the existence of the living dead. It's just a short hop from that to the ever so enlightened, science-friendly organisation of a torch-bearing mob in order to find the only foreign-looking gentleman in town. Which leads to that grand old chestnut of a Universal horror movie ending a monster chased down by a torch-bearing mob and trapped in a building which they promptly set on fire. Kharis the mummy is played in this movie by Lon Chaney Jr. and Chaney would play Kharis again in the next film, and the final Kharis movie, apparently he hated playing the mummy, and watching this film you can sympathise. He's not given much to do apart from one excellent and hilarious WTF moment that he gives Kharis when Bay says he's going to go completely off script and orders him to kidnap a woman that he's going to make his immortal bride. It does mean, though, that Lon Chaney Jr. gets the distinction of having played the Wolfman, Frankenstein's creature, Dracula, and the Mummy for Universal Studios. There is no comic relief in this movie. The heroes from the Mummy's Hand are now old men. Babe Jensen returns, now strangely called Babe Hansen, himself now old and with no more jokes left to tell. The cult of Karnak's brief is simple and clear, and Bay goes about his work with a grim efficiency, not only wiping out those who breached Princess Ananka's tomb 30 years ago, but all their living relatives as well. Indeed, Bay is not averse to getting the job done himself personally. When he sees Banning, he tries to shoot him, even though they're surrounded by a crowd of a couple of dozen people. As long as the interlopers die, that is all that matters. There's more mummy action in this movie, but it's exactly the same order as we've seen before. It's not innovative, it's not really very exciting. It is, however, like a comfortable pair of slippers and a dressing gown, but to my mind, the second of the Kharis movies is the least of all four of them. But as regular viewers know, my opinion is just one interloper into the tomb of Princess Ananka amongst many, and I like to round off these reviews when I can with alternate viewpoints taken from Internet Movie Database user reviews. And the first one comes to us from Jim Lee 225 with a review that he calls hilarious. Obviously not one of the classic Universal horror films, but it is ridiculous fun. Poor Lon's limping mummy lumbers along at a snail's pace whilst potential victims wait in terror. Word of advice, people, run. And finally, whenever we can give the last word to channel favourite Jacob John Taylor 1, we do, in a review that he calls The second one is scarier than the first one. This is a sequel to The Mummy's Hand. It is scarier than The Mummy's Hand, and that is not easy to do. The Mummy's Ghost is scarier. The Mummy Cures is also scarier. This is a horror classic. 5.8 is a good rating. But this such a great movie, 5.8 is underrating it. This is a 9. It has great acting. It also has a great storyline. It also has great special effects. If this movie does not scare you, no movie will. This is scarier than The Shining, and that is not easy to do. This is scarier than A Nightmare on Elm Street, and that is not easy to do. This is scarier than Friday the 13th, and that is not easy to do. Harold Young is a great filmmaker. This is one of his best movies. See it.